To me, this is not just another nation. It is not just one of the family of nations. This is a nation with a great mission to perform for the benefit of liberty-loving people everywhere.
That we shall be as a city upon a hill.
These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country.
You've come to fight as free men. Free men you are. What will you do without freedom?
Proclaim liberty throughout all the land.
In one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. You gotta fight for your right. Can you dig it?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of Real News. My name is Mr. Henry David Shine Thompson, sitting over there, maybe to your left, maybe to your right. It doesn't necessarily matter because he's always going to be there whether you see him or not. What's the date today? I'm figuring this out on the fly. August 17th, 9:02 in the morning. How is everyone doing? We got the unified chat going over here. That means if you go to realnewsradio.live, realnewsradio.live, sort of the central landing page for all things real news related, you'll find the link to the Twitch, Real News, to the YouTube, to Facebook, to wherever we're streaming on right now. You'll find the link at Minds, Parler, all that stuff. If you make a comment on one of these streaming platforms, I will see it in this unified chat. Good to go up here. How is everybody doing this morning? How was everybody's weekend, man? Let me just go into a little bit what we did over the weekend. Y'all saw some of the posts that we had a crew of about 4 or 5 of the folks out there on Saturday. We were just pounding doors, pounding the pavement, doing what we do, trying to get the word out to gather signatures for the Nashville Taxpayer Protection Act. Now, what the Nashville Taxpayer Protection Act would do, you'll see in the show notes. It's linked right there under the website 4, goodgovernment.com. 34% property tax increase that has been proposed and passed here in the Nashville area. It would drop that 34% all the way back down to 2%. It would cap it at 2% every year going forward unless you had approval through voter referendum. We were out there gathering signatures, had a fantastic time. And I'll tell y'all, I tell this to some of the volunteers. I believe in all sincerity when I say this, door knocking is much more about creating community narrative and buzz across friends and neighbors than it even is about gathering signatures. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, the primary reason why we're out there is to gather signatures. But those conversations you were having at the doorstep, the conversations you're having as those conversations go back out to their community. They talk to the people they go to church with the following day. When we're knocking on Saturdays, people go to church and do the Zoom meetings or the small groups, whatever they're doing the following week. They have those conversations with their friends and families. They say, hey, these guys were at my doorstep. These folks were at my doorstep talking about this thing to stop the property tax increase. Did you even know that was going on? Here, I have a copy. Sign this for me. That type of narrative that's created is something that surpasses even the media landscape. It gets right to the core of where it is, to the core of where it is. That's a different thing, Sean.
Good right Monday morning, everybody.
Welcome to the show.
Gets to the core of it.
The core of where it is. Developing organic stories, man, in a very organic way. Hey, so anyways, just a quick pitch. We'll be out there doing it again next Saturday. I have not picked the area yet. I don't know if we're going to be in the Bellevue area, maybe Antioch area. Maybe we'll go to the Hermitage area this time around. Trying to get some houses that are a little bit spaced closer together, that type of thing. But that was my weekend. We had a great time. Wife came out and joined us as well. It was fairly humid. Hopefully a little bit cooler next weekend. What's like on your end, Shine? How was your weekend, buddy?
Well, we had wow, man, my camera angle's all messed up. Wow. Okay. Sorry, I was looking at Grant's camera all morning trying to get his shot set up. But we had a great weekend here in Knoxville, down at the Knoxville AFP office. We got a little legislative wrap-up from Representative Lafferty, and also went over with some of the Knoxville folks some of the finer points of door knocking and other ways to engage in grassroots activity. Which, Grant always gets to do a kind of a shameless plug about what he's working on with the forgoodgovernment.com. That's forgoodgovernment.com to get your petition to stop the 34% property tax. But I'll do a quick commercial. If anybody out there has heard about, the $3.5 trillion or so that we've already done with bailouts, and they want to do more. In fact, they want to basically double what we've already done with the Democrats legislation they proposed called the HEALS Act. If anybody wants to volunteer to do some grassroots activity to let people in other states know, and I'm doing it in a bunch of different states, but letting them know how bad this legislation is by sending them text messages. If you want to be involved in the fight against stopping these bailouts, either send Real News or myself a direct message and we can hook you up. Even just an hour a week would help so much. And it'll make you feel like you're doing something to stop something that you disagree with anyway, which is, and actually don't discount how empowering that can make you feel.
Yes.
Because like it's one thing to like complain in the chat or get Grant and I to talk about something for 10 or 15 minutes. That's kind of moving the needle. That's doing that long-term culture change. But the real thing is when you can get people to contact their legislators about it and say, I disagree, get them to say, I disagree with that. And even you letting your legislator know you disagree with it. That's what really makes change. Quicker than other things that we see going on in the world today, that other tactics people are using. We actually know how to get things done. But anyway, that's my little commercial, and I appreciate everybody who came out to the AFP Knoxville office, and everybody who's watching this morning. We're gonna have a great week. We're gonna have show 100 this week.
Yeah, that's
we're
right.
gonna have show 100, and actually over here. At least for most of the time, Grant, I'm experimenting with having the chat back on the screen again. So people can see in the show, they're going to be able to see the chat up on the screen.
I love it, man.
All right.
By the way, too, Sean, I love what you said a second ago about the sense of empowerment it gives you, man. It really does. It really does when you can see that moving. And especially at the end of it, when you get that win, right? So say the piece of legislation does or doesn't pass and you were supporting it or not supporting it, or say the referendum does or doesn't get put on a ballot and you were trying to get put, let's say it does get put on the ballot. I mean, any one of these things that you get you get a win with, I mean, how much better it feels when you are an active part of putting that together. Greatest audience in the nation appreciation segment right now. Judy says in Facebook a second ago, good day to all. DST, the older you get, looking more like Uncle R.
She's saying I look like my Uncle Robbie. He's only, which is her son, and he's only 4 years older than me. So we do look a lot alike. It's crazy.
That's sweet, man.
Yeah.
Very cool.
He's a pretty good looking guy, I must say.
That's what I'm talking about. Shine looking like Uncle R. We might have to call him Uncle R in the chat from now on, just so everyone is on the same page. Hey, other prayer requests here going on the Greatest Audience of the Nation appreciation segment. If you don't know what this is here, quickly. Here at Real News, we're trying to develop community. We try and live life with each other and progress and build with each other and all this type of stuff. And we consider y'all the greatest audience in the nation because this is a community. It's not just a program like this. So let us know what you're about, where you're at, what psychology you're dealing with or studying right now, and what philosophy you're into, what books you're reading, especially today. There's a major book we're going to be diving headlong into. And primarily, what concerns you have, what prayer requests you have. Do you need a hot meal cooked? Do you need someone showing up to your doorstep? Do you just need someone to talk to? Need to reach out to a friend? All right, you feeling a little bit down on yourself? In that vein, I want everyone to keep this person in mind. Representative Mike Carter here in Tennessee. It's the Times Free Press headline right now. Representative Mike Carter, Udawal's Representative Mike Carter here from Tennessee is in the ICU. This came out last night in the ICU with COVID-19. Now, the headline says after attending Lincoln Day dinner, bro, how you can draw the causality of something like that, I have no idea. And frankly speaking, I think it's a not just misleading. I think it's even, I don't know, man. It's certainly disingenuous. I'll say a match of Times Free Press to just draw that associative line when I don't know how you could do that. I mean, it's drawing a bias into a story that should have nothing to do with a bias, right? The reason why you would want to report on something like this is, I would think, is so that people could extend their prayers and concerns and good vibes and whatever you believe in. Right? So people could be socially aware and conscious and understand like this is a very real thing. The virus is here. We need to be conscious and aware of it. And we need to be respectful of our fellow man, that type of thing. Drawing it into attending a Lincoln Day dinner, I don't know what that has to do with any reporting on anything, but whatever. Here you go. Here's the story. Tennessee State Rep Mike Carter, an Udawal Republican, was hospitalized Sunday in an intensive care unit at the hospital there, where former Hamilton County judge is fighting a coronavirus infection. I know a couple colleagues confirmed this as of Sunday night. Let's see here. It says, our friend and colleague is battling COVID and he's in the ICU. And he's, let's see, who was that from? Yeah, that's from Jeremy Faison. Cosby confirmed to the Times Free Press. Now, Faison said he and Carter texted together yesterday and he asked me to make sure people are praying for him. Let's see here. Another legislator confirmed that the account as well. Carter is the chairman of the House Civil Justice Subcommittee, committee rather. He's the chairman of the House Civil Justice Committee and widely regarded figure on Capitol Hill. He was absent last week, notably during the General Assembly's special legislative session. He's the second known Tennessean lawmaker to have tested positive for COVID-19. The other one is Ken Calfee. And I believe this is confirmed here as well. House Speaker? They're still calling him that? Was that that's calling Glenn Cassidy a House Speaker?
You know, it may be one of those things, Grant, like representative or senator, once you've been it.
Oh, you think?
You know, like
the title remains?
The title remains, like the honorable never goes away once you're a judge.
See, right.
It may be like that, you know.
Okay, well, that makes sense. They did say over the weekend House Speaker.
Or it could be like the way news is now. Nobody knows how to Google. So, like, they could have just made a mistake. Right. That happens more often now than I've ever seen in my entire life. They may just have thought he's still the speaker. I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, though. You know what I'm saying?
No, and you're probably right, honestly. But they went on to say the House Speaker Glenn Cassidy is Republican from Franklin area. Also was absent from the special session, confirmed in Tennessee that he was in quarantine after having been exposed to someone with coronavirus. Jonathan just said on Facebook that's a typo. Jonathan also said that Joni got it at the dinner too, he believes. Jessica said prayer for the children in her area. And Jessica said, found out an ex-cop in my area was fired in 2014 for stuff on his computer while working. Heard of no charges. Then a local who goes out and exposes predators got the guy on video trying to meet with a 15-year-old boy. Goodness gracious. And of course, the police here do nothing and the media is doing nothing. So prayer concerns all around, by the way, just so everybody. Story that Jessica's talking about in Pennsylvania for the police officer that the justice is seen there. Prayers for Mike Carter, Representative Mike Carter here as well. That's the primary reason why we're bringing this story up and all the interrelated things. And just one more time to tell people, hey, be safe out there. Be conscientious of where you are, what you're doing, whatever else, right? I mean, obviously, I'm a libertarian. I'm going to lean the way that I do, but, just stuff's going down, right? Just be safe is all I'm saying. Keep Representative Mike Carter in your mind. And let us know what other stuff you're struggling with right now. Hard reset here, literally at 9:13, because the rest of this program this morning, a sizable portion of it is going to be taken up by a concept called anti-fragility. So as we reset here, realnewsradio.live, realnewsradio.live. That is the central landing page, the hub for all real news related things. Go there, see where we're at. If you're commenting at all right now, I can see it in the unified chat. This concept of anti-fragility. So I'm reading through this book called The Coddling of the American Mind. My brother actually, he brought this book my way a couple months back. I believe it was over the July 4th weekend. We were specifically talking about some of the marches and protests going on, and just him and I both trying to get our heads around it. And we actually spoke recently. And again, if y'all don't know, my brother, I talk about it frequently on this program because he's a very good case example I like to use of what I would consider to be a reasonable Democrat. Or he's just a classic liberal is all he is, really. But him and I speak quite often. We spoke over the weekend, and him and I both were in agreement that just the fringe on either side, we just can't handle it any longer. It's unsustainable. And frankly speaking, him and I both don't exactly know what party we actually even belong to for a sizable portion of some of these political issues right now. So back in July 4th, we were talking about this idea of like, what is happening, man? What are these protests going on? Where is this stuff coming from? And he was actually saying, I've been reading through this book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And it's exactly that. It's how parents in academia and figures in the lives of what they will say is Generation Z, not millennials. Be clear here. They say the cutoff period is about 1995. So anyone prior to 95, you're good. You're good to go on this one, right? But anybody born from 1995 and afterwards, unfortunately, they're putting the entirety of this burden on your generational shoulders, saying that there's been a coddling experience going on. And this concept of anti-fragility plays into this perfectly right now. I think the concept of anti-fragility plays into this idea of everything is offensive. Everything becomes overwhelming. Everything must be fought against. And as you do that, you dilute the definition of any real thing. You dilute the definition of racism. You dilute the definition of what a Nazi is. You dilute the definition of, I don't know. It doesn't matter. But this concept of anti-fragility. So this was, I'll tell you in a second, it's a concept that was developed by Professor, his name is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And maybe pronouncing that last name wrong, but it is what it is. Now, anti-fragility, it's the property of systems that increase in capability to thrive as a result of stressors, shocks, volatility, noise, mistakes, faults, attacks, or failures. That's a very interesting concept to keep in mind with everything that's currently going on politically. And a little bit of what I'm trying to do is cite a sense of source as to why we are where we are right now. And hopefully how to fix it going forward, which is a very strange thing to do, because what I'm eventually going to pitch and push is that shock, volatility, noise, mistakes, faults, attacks, or failures, all of these stressors are good things. In the concept of anti-fragility, human beings need these things to progress. Anti-fragility, it's different. I'll get to this in a second, but it's different than just being rigid or being able to bounce back, as they say, or being able to
being
deal
resilient, or being resilient.
Yes.
It's not like being anti-fragile is not being able to keep, get a licking and keep on ticking. It's beyond that. It's beyond that. Yeah.
It's necessary, right? It's necessary to grow. And again, it's a concept that was pitched by the professor, Nicholas Taleb, in his book, Anti-Fragile and Technical Papers. Now, this guy explains in his book that anti-fragility is a fundamentally different concept, like we were just saying, from resiliency and robustness. The concept has been applied in risk analysis, physics, molecular biology, transportation planning, engineering, and aerospace, computer science as well. And this guy that wrote The Coddling of the American Mind is taking that concept and applying it to the human sciences, which is just like it's a mind-blowing thing. And I know it's 9:17 in the morning. We're diving into the deep end. This is real news, right? This is what we do. Now, in his book, Taleb stresses the differences between anti-fragile and resilience, just as Shine was talking about. He's saying anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness. The resilience resists shocks and stays the same. Anti-fragile gets better. Y'all understand? The resilient resists shocks, but stays the same. A plastic cup. You can drop it as many times as you want to, but it's still going to keep the form of a plastic cup. The anti-fragile gets better because of the shock. An adaptive system of one that changes its behavior based on information available at the time of utilization, as opposed to having the behavior defined during the system design. This characteristic is sometimes referred to as the cognitive. While adaptive systems allow for robustness under a variety of scenarios, they are not necessarily anti-fragile. In other words, the difference between anti-fragile and adaptive is the difference between a system that is robust under volatile environments and conditions and one that is robust under previously unknown environment. So as we go into this next concept here in this next headline from The Atlantic.
Hey, Grant, real quick.
Yeah, buddy.
I know we didn't plan on this or anything, but do you mind if I share my screen and show you and the audience a graphics to help them understand the difference between resiliency and anti-fragile?
Dude, no, absolutely. That'd be great.
All right. Can you see this right here? This picture?
Yeah.
Fragile, resilient, and anti-fragile?
Yeah.
So fragile is obviously where we don't want to be. That's obviously where we don't want to be. But we're talking about the tension between what would be two solutions to being fragile. One is the archetype of the phoenix. Stays the same in volatility and difference to tranquility and volatility, but it's not as efficient being a phoenix, because phoenixes do have to die and be reborn, which is not necessarily how you want to deal with crisis and trouble. You don't want to be destroyed by something and have to rebuild the order of your life or your system that you're dealing with. Anti-fragile, though, even though the phoenix is like, that's better than being fragile. So that's important to remember, because being fragile is the worst. You're like sword of Damocles. It's ready to fall on your head. But anti-fragile is the Hydra. Now, what's the deal with the Hydra? The Hydra, when it takes a lick, it gets stronger. So grows and gets stronger from volatility. More upside than downside when it comes to volatility. So you're seeking the trouble so that you can fix it and become stronger. You seek disorder. Mistakes, small and benign. The myth is the Hydra. But the whole idea there, and I'll stop sharing screen now, is...
Actually, so I was going to say, I think I saw that, but I don't know if they saw that, man. So go ahead and keep sharing the screen as I go into the next part if you want to.
Oh, you could see it, but they couldn't see it. Here, I can put it up on the screen. There we go. But
yeah,
the words are almost as more important than the graphic.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
The tension between the Hydra and the I love that they gave it a mythological creature and the Phoenix. But the Hydra, it's only got one head, but then it hits volatility, it hits struggle, and then it doubles its capacity to handle the problem. But I remember that graphic. That's from the Art of Manliness website. They have an article, How to Become Anti-Fragile. It's probably a distillation of this book. So if you don't want to jump into this book, or you're thinking about jumping in this book, you could go read that article on the Art of Manliness. And if it sparks your interest, go get this book that Grant's talking about.
Yeah, man. That's awesome, dude. That's great. That the Hydra for real. That's exactly what it is. Because you cut one hand off and it's going to spawn two more, right? That's anti-fragility, right? And as I go into this next headline from the Atlantic, and again, this is all working up to eventually this headline for this morning, a solution to the violence, because people are just trying anything and everything right now. I think the solution to the violence might be focusing more on what got us here in some sense. I think the solution may be focusing on more on what grows us as a human species. But as we go into this next headline here, that from the Atlantic, how America became so sensitive to harm, keep in the back of your mind this concept of anti-fragility. And also keep in the back of your mind that what we're talking about is a direct application to the world politic as we know it right now. So this concept of anti-fragility, essentially, like Shine just said, another analogy you could use is this. So wind extinguishes a candle but energizes a fire. Wind extinguishes a candle but energizes a fire. Talib advises us not to be like candles and not to raise our children to be like candles. You want to be the fire and wish for the wind. You want to be the fire and wish for the wind. Don't be a candle, all right? So the Atlantic, in this book, A Coddling of the American Mind, they study this concept called concept creep. And it's a massive paper that was put out by this guy, Nick Haslam, a research paper put up by Nick Haslam from the University of Melbourne. Concept creep. It's called Concept Creep, Psychology's Expanding Concepts of Harm and Pathology. And in this paper, Haslam argues that the concept like abuse, bullying, trauma, mental disorders, addiction, and prejudice now encompass a much broader range of phenomena than they ever did before, and expanding meanings that reflect ever-increasing sensitivity to harm. All right, so you're getting the concept right now. Concept creep is this idea of take anything like racism, or bullying, or trauma, or abuse, or disorder, or addiction, any of these terms. And slowly, as society progresses, it grows further and further and further, encompasses more and more and more things. And as it does that, the definition itself starts to become diluted. So now everything is racist, and therefore nothing is actually racist. You see the problem? Now, he calls the expansion of this meaning, like we said before, concept creep. Now, although critics may hold the concept creep responsible for damaging cultural trends, he writes, quote, such as supposed cultures of fear, therapy, and victimhood, the shifts I present have some positive implications as well. He still adds, they also have potentially damaging ramifications for society and psychology that cannot be ignored. So most of the things we're going to bring up today are the damaging sides, but keep in mind, too, there are some positive effects of concept creep. You learn more about a particular topic or a particular subject, and as that concept tends to creep into more knowledge, you can respond more appropriately. You know what I'm saying? So in the 1950s, one example they give, in the 1950s, it was a thing of where, I don't know, child abuse was not necessarily considered smoking around your child all the time, or I don't know, what was the other things they said, of leaving it in a hot car all the time. There was maybe not laws specifically against that.
Spanking.
Yeah, sure, right? Spanking. But let's go to something like bullying, all right? Now, here's the headline here on bullying. How does an honor student engaged in the oldest student pastime, complaining to peers about a teacher, wind up suspended with a cyberbullying mark on her record? This is what Haslam writes. So the concept of bullying has spread from its original meaning to encompass a wider range of phenomena. It has expanded horizontally into online behavior, into adult workplaces, and into forms of social exclusion that do not directly target the victim with harmful actions as distinct from hurtful admissions. A perfect story I like to bring up here is about 3 or 4 years ago when Sean and I were just starting Real News on the AMFM side. We actually covered this story. It was a conversation that exchanged in a UK workplace. Over in Britain somewhere, right? And a white person from the South that had just moved to UK had a black friend that he was working with. I mean, they were close friends. The black guy was actually the dude that brought the white dude over there to work for the company in Britain, London. Now, the white guy ended up telling some racist joke to his buddy, and another white female coworker overheard this joke. Now, on behalf of the black guy, she was offended for him. This black guy apparently was not offended. They've been buddies for a while. I don't pretend to understand in his subjective idea as to why that was or wasn't offensive. It doesn't matter. This lady over here got offended on behalf of the black guy, and the white guy ended up getting fired because she brought the situation to HR. This is a little bit of what Haslam's talking about when he says that this victim mentality or bullying can extend to people that was never direct. The action was never actually directed at that individual. Bullying has expanded vertically as well. They say bullying behavior that is less extreme than prototypical bullying now falls within the bounds. Haslam observes, adding, in some circumstances, bullying behavior need not be repeated or intentional, and it need not occur in the context of a power imbalance as traditionally conceived. This concept creep might square with our intentions if, say, a bullying college student posted on one occasion some type of revenge. You can read the word for yourself. I don't know if I can say it on Facebook. Adult entertainment, some revenge adult entertainment. That would be a single occurrence where you would say that, yes, that is categorically definitional bullying. Yet the same concept creep produces this excess. The same, the good and the bad, right? Catherine Evans, here's the story that I just brought up. Catherine Evans, she was frustrated with her English teacher for ignoring her pleas for help with assignments at in a reproach when she missed class to attend a school blood drive. Now, Miss Evans, who was then a high school senior and honor student, logged onto a networking site on Facebook and wrote a rant against the teacher. Here's her rant. It says, quote, to those students who've had the displeasure of having Miss Sarah Phelps or simply knowing her and her insane antics, here's the place to express your feelings of hatred, she wrote. Her posting drew a handful of responses, some of which were in support of the teacher and critical of Miss Evans. Here's one quote saying, whatever your reasons for hating her are, they're probably very immature, a former student of Miss Phelps said in her defense. Now, a few days later, Miss Evans, again, the high school senior, Miss Evans removed the post from her Facebook page and went about her business of preparing for graduation and studying journalism in the fall. But 2 months after her online venting, Miss Evans was called into the principal's office and was told she was being suspended for cyberbullying. A blemish on her record that she felt and feared could keep her from getting into the graduate schools or landing the dream job that she once had. One rant, reasonably mild, I would say, and so would this other say, one time by a teenager against an adult in a position of authority, by this low standard, this author says, by that low standard, if it's a single occasion by a teenager against a person in a position of authority, this author says that he's been cyberbullied on Twitter and email almost every single day of his life. You understand what he's saying? Think about the expanded notion of trauma for a second, and then I'll get into the Facebook comments here. Expanded notion of trauma. Now, some of this can be good. Talking about in the bygone wars, many of you experienced World War I soldiers coming back. They called it something called trauma. They would call it shell shock. Now, thanks to concept creep today's veterans are actually treated far better. In coining this thing they used to call shell shock into something that's much better known now as the effects and how we got there, and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? It's a positive thing for the way that we can treat people that are coming back from war. But in recent years, trauma theorists and practitioners have proposed including childbirth, sexual harassment, infidelity, emotional losses, such as abandonment by a spouse or a loss or sudden move or loss of a home within that range. These extensions are sometimes justified empirically by research. Hear that there. The extensions are sometimes justified empirically to include them within PTSD. Nevertheless, they represent a lowering of the threshold of the severity for traumatic events. A recent definition of trauma produced by the U.S. government Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, they say this is the lowering here, right? Individual trauma results from an series of events or set of circumstances that experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and psychological, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Now, that sounds fine. But when you compare that with the DSM, their criteria A for what is qualified as a traumatic event, here becomes the problem. A traumatic event need not be a discrete event. It need not involve serious threats to life or limb. It need not be outside normal experience, at least in the new definition. It need not be likely to create marked distress in almost everyone. and need not even produce marked distress in the traumatized person, who must merely experience it as harmful. Under this definition, the concept of trauma is rendered much broader and much more subjective than it ever was even decades ago. You understand what they're saying here? Now, everyone anywhere could experience trauma. Trauma need not be some objective thing. Like in the law, we have a standard called a reasonable man. If a reasonable man would have seen such and such as happening in such and such way, then you can go forward with that. It's very difficult to impose or to impart subjective little elements and all this stuff because, I don't know, man, what would you consider to be subjectively traumatic as far as seeing a spider or something else? The objective person may not. And trauma, the classification of trauma is meant to be something that is taken so seriously that everybody needs to do something, must do something, must recognize and listen and stop where they are to help, to lend aid, to be altruistic. You get what I'm saying? So now if everything is trauma, if everybody is experiencing trauma all the time, society halts, a screeching train stop deadline for everything. This goes on to say, indeed, by government's definition, a Wesley student who saw this statue of a man, this is a real story, by the way, a student that saw a statue of a man in his underwear, perceived the event as emotionally threatening and experienced lasting adverse effects on her spiritual well-being. That's a trauma victim. Since the same designation also encompasses victims of torture and brutal sexual assaults, and people who experience adverse effects as extreme as suicide, an inevitable effect of this concept creep is to leave us without language to distinguish between classical trauma, even though isolating such cases may be useful or necessary. You get what he's saying here? So in situations where stuff, viewing a statue could now be defined in the same breath as sexual assault, as people that have been to war, as victims of torture. Viewing a statue is now the same terminology, the same definition, the same psychological diagnosis as all of those other things that I just said. That's a major, major problem. And this doesn't just stop with, we have mental disorder in its treatments, we have changing views of prejudice, we have changing views of racial distinctions. And they posit some solutions, obviously, here. At least they say, why is concept creep going in the same direction? That's a super interesting part. We don't have time to get into that right now. I want to finalize by all this by saying, look, the harms of excessive concept creep can be seen in the following ways. This is, again, coming from Talib. It says there's many reasons to be concerned about excessive sensitivity to harm. And I say all this right now because if you can get your head around this, and I know it's a deep thing to dive into this early on a Monday morning, but if you can get your head around some of this idea, we desperately, on a case-by-case basis, need to be pushing back into this realm of nuance, be pushing back into saying it is okay to separate real trauma from something that should not be defined as real trauma. It is okay to make these lines of distinctions because in so doing, you are protecting those people who are legitimate victims. You are protecting the terminology that is applicable to a person that has experienced something that they cannot get over. Not everyone that's seen a statue is the same thing as a person that's experienced torture or sexual assault or any type of brutalization. But we as an American society have done that to our victims. We are further victimizing these people because we are making a mockery of what they have been through. I'm not saying every person out there in the streets that's marching is doing that, but I am saying I do think that's a core root of the problems that we are having right now. Talib agrees. He says, by applying concepts of abuse, bullying, and trauma to less severe and clearly defined actions and events, and by increasingly including subjective elements into them, concept creep may release a flood of unjustified accusations and litigation, as well as excessive and disproportionate enforcement regimes. That's one thing he touches on a second ago of how we got here and what the future looks like. What he just said in that simple sentence was, if everybody is a victim, then the other half of those people that are not victims are now oppressors. You see what's happening right now? If half of the country is victimized, they have to be victimized by somebody or something. And that someone or something is likely you and I. Whether you know it or not, this is where microaggressions come from. Whether you realize it or not, expanding the definition of victimhood also expands the definition of the oppressor. Because you cannot be victimized by nothing, so you must posit who is your victimizer, who is the oppressor, who has done the wrong to you, or what entity has done the wrong to you. I don't know what it is. But you and I are being slowly gobbled up in this definition, and you only realize it retrospectively. You only realize it when you look backwards. It's exceedingly difficult to see this stuff while it's happening. Talib continues by saying, concept creep can produce a kind of semantic dilution. We've talked about this, of the words meaning nothing anymore. If a concept expands to encompass less extreme phenomena, then its prototypical meaning is likely to shift. If trauma, for example, ceases to refer exclusively to terrifying events that are outside normal human experience and is applied to less severe and more prevalent stresses, it will come to be seen in a more benign light. Here's what he just said. He said, okay, look, trauma used to mean stuff that not everyone would ever deal with. Very few people would ever deal with a legitimately traumatic event. That's what trauma used to mean. Well, now if everybody is dealing with a traumatic event don't feel that they don't seem that bad anymore, now do they? If everybody on the right is a fascist, well, I don't know, man. If half the country's a fascist, the word fascist doesn't really seem all that bad anymore, does it? The final portion of what he's talking about here is saying, by increasing the range of people who are defined as moral patients, that is, people worthy of moral concern, based on their perceived capacity to suffer and be harmed, it risks, he says, reducing the range of people who see themselves as capable of moral agency. There is a tendency for, quote, for more and more people to see themselves as victims who are defined by their suffering, vulnerability, and innocence. The flip side of this expanding sense of victimhood would be to typecast. It would be a typecast assortment of moral villains, abusers, bullies, bigots, and traumatizers. And finally, he says expanding mental disorder can pathologize normal experiences, generate overdiagnosis and overtreatment, and engender a sense of diminished agency. Now, what all that says, in some sense, is getting back to the very beginning of this long rant. Anti-fragility. We not only jump so far over the mark of anti-fragility, we don't even consider it anymore. We don't even consider how these stressors in our lives can sometimes be there for good purpose. We don't even consider the simple analogy of the weightlifting show of the movie back in the day with Arnold Schwarzenegger, talking about you have to get in the weight room to become Mr. Universe. It was a great Arnold impression, right? What means
was really good. I mean, that was really nice.
What Arnold Schwarzenegger means is if you want to become Mr. Universe, you have to rip your muscles again and again and again to rebuild those muscles. Anti-fragility is not just resiliency to bounce back to where you had it before. It's the progression. It is the ability to grow. And we can only grow by trying ourselves, right? By struggling a little bit, by putting stressors in there, by going through some type of quest, man, by going through, I don't know, something to make you better. And what we've done instead is create a classhood of victims, which inevitably defines that there must be a classhood of oppressors. So now, if you are not, and this, I believe, hits it directly on the head. I think this is exactly where we are. And this is why people feel such a moral compulsion to define themselves by their victimhood. Because if they do not, they are considered moral villains, abusers, bullies, bigots, or traumatizers. Do you get what I'm saying, man? If you don't define yourself by your victimhood, then you're forced into falling into and defining yourself as a villain or an abuser or a bully or a bigot. Nobody's going to do that. And what we all seem to miss is the concept that humans, man, we are a beautiful species. We are wonderfully made and wonderfully created. Not just to be resilient, man, but to do something far better with our stressors. Let's hit some Facebook comments. I'll kick it to Shine for some comments as well. And then we'll get into our next story this goes all into. Jonathan said, given that, that's also why the left uses categories of people to promote victimhood. Yeah, 100%, right? When we're so easily divided by that, how easy is it to manipulate each other against us? When it literally is just classifications of victims or abusers. I mean, goodness gracious, man. All you got to do is throw a couple buzzwords here and there, and all of a sudden you can take a whole mob and just point it in a direction and just say, there's your abuser. What did they do? I don't know. They abused you in some way. Get them. Let's see. Dylan said in Facebook, Dylan, what's up? Are you new to YouTube? That's awesome. I don't think I've ever seen Dylan before. Dylan, what's up, buddy? Welcome to the party. Welcome to the family. Said, didn't see any live videos on Twitch. Maybe you guys got shadow bans. Does he normally watch on Twitch or something?
I have no idea, but we are live on Twitch. It's just not named Real News Radio. As you can see on the top of your screen, it's at Real News Radio Knox is the Twitch link. But, you know, you can watch it anywhere you want. It works about the same.
Let's see here. Jessica said in Facebook, saw an article on my parents' ODD group that was comparing tickling a child to torture. I shouldn't allow that. Really? Apparently, there was an article, she says, on her parents' ODD that was comparing tickling a child to torture. There was a whole 500 comment debate. Let's see. Jonathan said, yes, I do, but these people's views are fictitious. That's the problem. There's a legal standard and none of those psychological diagnoses pass the muster of legality. Let's see here. Sean Jones said a second ago, he put some links in there to a tweet somewhere. Let's see, where did you do that, Sean? I'll follow those tweets here. Oh, that's on the Facebook.
It's a video of some of Andy No's coverage, those tweets.
Gotcha.
What's going on in Portland? I clicked on them. I wanted to make sure they weren't like, porn or something like that. So otherwise I would have deleted them out of the chat. But they're Andy No links to his Twitter.
And look, man, in all sincerity, going over this idea of concept creep and anti-fragility, I may be taking it slightly out of context. To be frank, I think my brother, who might be in the show right now, listen to this, might have a better breakdown of some of this stuff. And I might be taking a little bit too much liberty to be applying it to what's currently going on the streets. But I don't think that I am.
Well, it's not just our streets, right? It's also in the academic system. It's in elementary and middle school and high school. It's in our corporate HR system. It's in every level of our society where this creep is happening. I watched some of Jordan Peterson's personality lectures over the weekend, and he was talking about PTSD, which would be like one of the most extreme categories of trauma. Like trauma is a category, and then within that category of trauma is the most extreme type is PTSD.
Right.
And he was talking about like how PTSD happens, or the circumstances that make up the most likely chance for you to get PTSD. And the explanation there is, even for soldiers, but even though it's not just soldiers who get PTSD, it's lots of other kinds of people too. It's when you don't know how dangerous the world is or how dangerous you can be, and then you experience that. And that friction, that conflict of I was not prepared for how dangerous the world is or how dangerous I can be, because that's a lot of times why soldiers get PTSD, is because they're scared of what they are capable of, and that freaks them out. Where was I going with this? The point I'm making is, like, we're creating this world where we're telling people the world is really not that dangerous, super not dangerous. And if anyone does something to you that even like makes you feel remotely uncomfortable, that is now trauma, right? So I think what we could be doing with people who are fragile, who are fragile, is you could be creating a lot of like little mini PTSD people by distorting their view of how dangerous the world is or how dangerous they are. Because that's, I was listening to Jordan Peterson, he says that's one of the biggest reasons people get PTSD. It's not necessarily always when stuff happens to them. A lot of times it's like in war or even in an extreme situation, defending yourself or something like that, people get PTSD because of the monster they can become to protect their loved ones or their friends. So it's very dangerous. And I think that it's not just annoying, and it's not just, a lot of people make fun of what we're talking about, saying, oh, these people are wimps. They think that calling them stupid is the same as punching them in the face. What a bunch of wimps. But we're really glossing over it too much. And we're not thinking of the long-term consequences for the society at large. We could be creating a bunch of people with like massive mental health issues, because they're just going around living there. Because humans are super adaptable, Grant, and no one has the experience of anyone else. They only have their own life experience. So theoretically, with the wrong training, a human could have a PTSD experience like a soldier, right, in war, in a very benign circumstance based on their training as a human. Theoretically, because that's the way human brains are. We're adaptable and we don't have anybody else's experience. People could be, because we've changed the definitions, we could change the reality, is what I'm saying. Words are important. We could actually give people PTSD with situations that have never given people PTSD. You know what I'm saying? Because we've changed the definitions of the words. It's really odd.
Well, and look, let's be totally fair here too. Again, to be fair to what Taleb presents in his findings here is that concept creep can be both good and bad, right? We're focusing on the bad today because we're diving into the bad way too much currently. But he also says this concept creep is something that infects, but if you want to get, in some type of ideological spectrum here, it also infects and effects both the left and the right in totally different ways. So think about this. John Haidt is a guy that posed a fourth theory as to how we got here, what the solution is or stuff like that. Now, he says, quote, if an increasingly left-leaning academia is staffed by people who are increasingly hostile to conservatives, then we can expect that their concepts will shift via motivated scholarship in ways that will help them and their allies. So what he just said there basically is like, look, man, if academia, if it's going to help you get forward in your life, if it's going to help you in your career, if it's going to motivate you by scholarship or something else to be a little bit hostile to conservative opinion, then you're going to be, the concept creep is going to naturally tend in that direction. He continues by saying, we can expect academic concepts to creep in ways that increase the number of victims and the damages those victims suffer, and in the ways that make it even harder for anyone to defend themselves against ugly moral charges. That's exactly what's going on right now. He says such politically motivated scholarship may sometimes originate in humanities departments rather than psychology, but it draws heavily on psychological concepts and research. It feeds back into the 6 streams of creeping psychological research that Haslam reviewed. Now, that's the liberal side. And we've all heard this in academia, and we've all heard how concept creep pushes in, or pushes out conservative thought and embraces liberal thought. And now you have this weird little echo chamber. And as we just discussed before, if everyone is becoming a victim, then therefore the other half of people that are not victims are now the oppressors. And therefore you are labeled as the oppressor and you're shut out of academia. And it's just this cookie cutter mentality that repeats and repeats and repeats. So that's academia. That's one industry, though. To be fair, consider what he says about this for the liberal skeptics of that explanation. For the liberal skeptics, suppose that the FBI, now we're getting somewhere, right? Suppose that the FBI is traditionally a right-leaning organization, which it is. Law enforcement is traditionally a right-leaning organization, like most law enforcement organizations are. Suppose conservatives outnumbered liberals about 3-1 from its foundation in 1908 all the way through the 1990s. But suppose that during the administration of George W. Bush, the agency began to lean much further to the right. After the 9/11 attacks, the agency's culture became extremely hostile to liberals and Democrats, who were widely associated with the gravest threats to the nation. By 2012, the ratio of conservatives to liberals went from what we said before, 3-1, to 14-1. Do you suppose that this transformation might affect the way FBI did its job? Or would you trust the agency's professionalism to keep politics out of law enforcement? We have absolutely seen how that's going recently, right? Come on. Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, any of these folks ring a bell? I'm not even saying they're Democrat, bro. I'm not even saying they're liberal. They're just not Trump. Clearly political agenda because they've been so comfortable doing it for a very long time. This is right way of thinking, ideologically spectrum-driven right, conservative way of concept creep. He finalized by saying this: might the agency shift its resources towards conservative priorities such as fighting terrorism, moral decay, while ignoring liberal policies like abortion bombing clinics or abortion clinic bombings, civil rights infringements, environmental crimes? And might we begin to see law enforcement and concepts creeping to the right such that more and more citizens fall under suspicion of entitlement cheating, abetting illegal immigration, or subverting American values? Perhaps we'd even see the creation of a brand new legal concept such as micro-treasons, microaggressions, micro-treasons. defined by as brief and commonplace daily verbal behavior or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes toward the United States of America. That is an exact quote from statutory law. What I'm saying is, and what I believe the concept, what we should embrace all of us across the board here today, is that this version of concept creep is wildly problematic on both sides. And somehow we desperately need to get back to an idea of what is considered rational, reasonable, objective, and nuanced. I can't stress that word enough, nuanced. Because otherwise, dude, Shine, let's end with this story in the last 9 minutes we have here. So underneath all that nonsense that I showed up there, if you could find it in the national stories section, Shine, it's below that major stuff. It's the next thing underneath all the highlighted purple language. The next thing under there says a solution to the violence. If we cannot get back to some version of nuanced conversation, if we cannot get back to something that will drive rational conversation, I genuinely believe we're going to see more and more things like this. One, Seattle's police chief, she just left. I mean, she's out of there. So in Seattle, what they ended up doing, because they're so progressive in Seattle, primarily one person, they drove out an African-American female police chief. Whoops. They cut her salary so much that she just willingly quit that job. That's how progressive they were over there. In Philadelphia, pull up that Twitter link there, Sean. It says Philadelphia is seeing an increase in shootings.
Yeah, you want me to play the whole thing?
Yeah, go ahead and play that video.
Catro here with an update on the story that I'm working on today. Today I'm talking about how city leaders are coming together with other community groups and the Philadelphia Police Department to combat gun violence. The city is seeing an increase in shootings. So city leaders are distributing this flyer which reads, "Save a life, turn in a gun." If you safely turn in a gun, that can help get it out of the hands of the wrong people. We're going to have a lot more information coming up on Action News on some new locations that should be popping up soon of where you can turn in a gun that you're not using. Catro here with an update on the story that I'm...
So what you just heard there, Philadelphia, seeing an increase in shootings to combat senseless gun violence. City Council, Philadelphia police and community groups organized a home gun check, urging residents to safely turn in firearms just that are lying around at their homes before they get into the wrong hands. Now, look, man, I don't know. I just like, is this the solutions that we've reached so far? I mean, this is apparently the solutions that make the most sense to, and I'm not trying to be, I'm sounding demeaning. I am, and it sounds belittling when I go through it this way. But I'm not trying to be that belittling. I promise you, I'm not. I'm just saying, if we can somehow look at this situation logically, that we're talking about a massive defunding of the police, which I understand. Let's be totally fair here. The idea of defunding the police, the overwhelming majority that support that idea, are not talking about actually totally defunding. Some of them are. Seattle certainly is. Seattle certainly did. The story linked right below this one in the show notes is one definitely worth checking out. Some of them are, but most people are just saying it's like a reallocation of funding. So we don't necessarily need police officers showing up to, I don't know, man, fill in the blank. Something police officers aren't trained properly to do that maybe some social workers should be trained to do. You get the concept. But in general, if we're talking about defunding police, along with the same party pushing this idea of you shouldn't have Second Amendment rights, dude, who's going to fill that power vacuum? I mean, let's be honest, for real. Bad people. And this is what I'm saying, man. Going back to what we said a second ago. So you want to talk about like real victimization, real victimhood. Like I personally believe, and I could be wrong, and I'm actually literally fingers crossed praying that I am wrong about some type of assessment like this. But I would think that a solution like this would only lead to more victimization of people. So if you have a gun right now, if you're because lawful gun owners are going to turn their guns in, right? If you own a firearm,
lawful gun owners don't have guns that are lying around that some person could just pick up and use for a crime. That's like, that whole idea is just like crazy to me. I know no one who has just guns. Oh, yeah, that's my pile of guns in the corner. They're just piled up, you know. If you need one, just grab one. No one does that. No one lives their life that way.
Jonathan said, the entire problem is we are all responsible for our own emotions. No one makes me feel anything. They don't understand emotions. Naka, cool name. Really? That is awesome. Anyways, Jones said, I've noticed that our schools are not teaching our children how to think for themselves. This country is producing followers. It's horrible. Sean said, does she want the stockpile I buried in the backyard? Sean's wondering if she wants the stockpile Sean has buried in the backyard. That's awesome. I don't know. Possibly Sean. Sean did say, by the way, too, in posting those Twitter links, he vetted them properly before. And Sean is actually a war vet himself. Where did he say that a second ago? We appreciate you for your service, by the way, Sean. Seriously. Jessica just said, my guns are in my closet. My fathers are scattered around the house, saying, LOL. I don't know if they could find them all. Let's see. Jones said, Nika said, I completely agree. No matter what you must say, you are racist. I'm Cuban and Puerto Rican. How's that? Well, it's where we are right now, right? And let me end in the last 4 minutes here just by making this appeal.
No, you're Latinx. Get it right or pay the price.
Golly, that's man.
I'm sorry. Right? That was a joke, obviously. Yeah. But, like, white people named you. Okay, don't you need to go by that name? They named you Latinx.
Latinx with an X.
That's why I said that.
Inclusive, right? Yeah.
That's why I said it, because like that's offensive, I think, to a lot of people of Spanish American descent.
Yeah.
Because I don't even like Latino either. I don't think it's. But I'm not. But I'm not in the fight. Who cares? I don't have a dog in that fight. But like, it's weird. We live in a weird freaking world, man. We live in a world that doesn't make sense. And that's why we do this show, is try to make as much sense as possible to us and for you guys. And I appreciate you diving into this topic of being anti-fragile.
Yeah, because honestly, that's why we started. And by we, when I say we, I mean people that I'm going to forget their names, honestly, of all who's had something to do with this program. But Shine, myself, Brandon Acuff for actually coining the term real news while Sean and I were trying to figure out what the name of the program should be. Roz, who was the producer back in the day. John Adams for giving us a shot on the radio to begin with. Mickey, Nathan, all the folks that added commentary. Richard Esparza for the fantastic guest that he's booking. Everybody that was involved from the very beginning. Our purpose and motto and mission statement has always been exactly this type of stuff. It's been creating a situation by which a community where we could have conversations, calm, cordial dialogue, disagreement, and debate with those that we may not see eye to eye with. So that when, this is what Shine added a few years later, so that when we do have disagreements, we're making sure we're having disagreements amongst friends and neighbors, not enemies. Because I finalized this whole thing today. Look, everything we went through, and as much as we're nitpicking and stuff, and as much as we're critiquing certain segments of society or demographics or whatever, I want to say finally this. The wind can extinguish a candle. Wind can extinguish a candle, but it energizes a fire. Do not be like candles. Don't raise your children to be candles. You want to be the fire and wish for the wind. All right? As a human species, man, as Americans in particular, let's be for real, as Americans in particular, we are uniquely situated to grow through strife because of our turmoils, not in spite of them, but because of our turmoils. We are better people. We are better communities, better society, and a better nation. That is what we forgot, right? Embrace nuance again. Embrace love and compassion and kindness, and embrace an ability to call someone out when they're wrong, if and when you have to, through love, compassion, and kindness. Hey, my name is Mr. Henry. We got to get out. David Shine Thompson sitting over there. We'll be back tomorrow doing it big. Love each and every one of y'all. Seriously.